Sean, thanks very much for joining us. There's been a huge rise in terms of e-commerce, a big focus, particularly from investors, but also, I guess, a kind of wider understanding of logistics as more people have been having to use that for their shopping, for all manner of things. What's your sense of that in terms of both, I suppose, the short-term influence of the health crisis, but also potentially the longer-term influence?
Well, I think the pandemic has really added sort of rocket fuel to the e-commerce revolution. There's normally a sort of diffusion of innovations that take place over, quite a considerable number of years. And we've seen e-commerce, increasingly become the sort of go-to for a lot of people, but it's been a slow progression. What the pandemic has done is basically forced people into a situation where they almost have no choice but to look at electronic ordering. They're basically not allowed to leave their homes. Then they're dissuaded from going anywhere where there's lots of people. So things like shopping malls, those sorts of things. So we've seen a twofold effect, really. We've seen a lot of companies have to shut their doors and can't trade. And we've seen a lot of people who previously have very limited experience of e-commerce shopping, people like my parents, for example, who, because of their age, are at risk, and therefore the only way they can get goods is to go online and to shops. Because once they do that, they then get exposed to, hang on a second, this isn't as big and as frightening as I potentially thought it would be. And gosh, I can order pretty much anything from places like Amazon and it gets delivered the very next day. Why would I want to go and stand in the supermarket and queue for hours when I can just order it online? So I think what we're seeing is, obviously a massive short-term spike in e-commerce, which companies like Amazon are really struggling to handle, and certainly the grocers in the UK, Tesco's and people like that, really struggle with initially. But I also think this is going to be a long-term trend, because I think a lot of people have become exposed to this and are just going to look at it and go, why would I go back to these old ways of working? So yeah, short-term, massive spike, but I think it has really compressed what was going to be a long-term shift anyway into just a shorter period of time.
And do you think that's going to sort of fundamentally change some of the things for logistics, particularly looking here in Europe?
Yeah, absolutely. If I look across Europe, the internet adoption rates are very high in places like the UK, in places like Germany. Other countries, specifically across the CEE, not so high. The further you go east, the less the internet has been adopted. We're seeing a lot of people really exposed at this moment in time because they don't have internet access, and putting a lot more pressure on getting internet access. So suddenly, if you're locked in at home and the only thing you have access to is your Netflix and online shopping, and your broadband is awful, or you don't even have broadband, then you're feeling very exposed. So I think there are a lot of people who've upscaled their internet connectivity, or put a lot of pressure on internet companies to provide them with internet connectivity so that they can take advantage of things like e-commerce shopping, for example. Which means effectively that in order to be able to deliver these goods, the retailers and the logistics companies who support the retailers are going to have to look at their network in order to support that. And some of that means, being able to put goods closer to where those actually customers are, because, you need same day, next day delivery. You've got to have those items quite close to where your consumers are. So, if the customer's not going to come to us and we have to go to the customer, then we have to think about our logistics footprint and our entire supply chain model.
No, very interesting. It's going to be fascinating to watch to see how this develops. But for now, Sean, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Take care.